Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on your location in the world. My name is Mike Mahan. I am the sales director for LANSA. Joining me today is Eugene King. He's one of our senior sales engineers. He's actually just starting his 26th year with LANSA. So lots of expertise on the phone, certainly from his perspective. We're going to spend about the next 40 minutes or so covering our visual LANSA product and how it relates to partners, in particular our ISVs. So the table of contents, so basically what we're going to cover today, we'll spend a little bit of time about what low code is, why do low code projects fail, and basically how we can help with that. Then we're going to spend the majority of the time covering a demonstration of exactly how visual LANSA operates with some examples. And the idea is you will get an understanding of how this could help you develop applications much more quickly and maintain them at lower cost. We'll wrap up with a short overview of our partner program, and then we'll jump right into Q&A at the end. So at this point, I'd like to kind of formally introduce Eugene, and he will take over for now. Eugene?
It'd help if I unmute myself at that point. Okay, so thank you, Mike. So what I want to first do is just take a look at what is low code. You'll find that the low code is the word of the day in the market, and really we want to look at how LANSA compares to other sorts of low code tools, focusing on visual LANSA, and in fact we'll do a demo a little bit later, as Mike mentioned. So what exactly is low code? Well, low code is an alternative method of application development that focuses on things like templates, wizards, drag and drop functions, automatic code generations, plugins, or pre-built connectors, all aim of reducing the amount of hand coding. Now, low code is designed to allow the developer to focus on solutions rather than focusing on how to code a solution. It employs the WYSIWYG concept. What you visually see on the screen is how your application will render. Now, there are certain issues with low code, and this is why a lot of the low code projects fail. And the first one is unfamiliar environment and concepts for the developers. So model-based low code is centered around creating workflows and a drag and drop graphical interface. Traditional developers may have difficulty adjusting to this new environment and the new way of working. They will lose a lot of control over what they are doing, as everything is built using a modeling tool. Developers love to code, and writing code to solve problems is how they prefer to handle complex situations. There's also a limit in the flexibility in the development environment. So the developer can create processes and logical decisions only if the low-code platform has the module to do so. The developer is often limited to the features available inside the platform's development environment. If the platform does not offer a solution to the problem, then a developer must leave it and create a workaround using another tool. Now, once this has been done, then a connector must be created to link the workaround to the low-code solution. So in short, anything the developer needs to accomplish that isn't available on the platform cannot be completed with that particular development tool. There's also a difficulty in handling complex requirements. So imagine using a really complex coding solution that needs several different types of connections to several external resources, and then having to make the processing decision based on what each resource returned, only to find that each resource returned data in a different format. This then needs to be reformatted into a common format to be used by your own systems. Now, try solving that using a graphical interface. Using dragging and dropping the icons onto that interface would lead to a very convoluted and complex solution, which will be hard to maintain going forward. Without a way to handle these complex processes, model-based low-code platforms are not capable of handling large enterprise applications by themselves. There are also hidden costs. Now, the cost of these types of projects can spiral out of control very quickly because the cost is dependent on a number of factors: the number of end users, number of servers, and also on the size and the number of applications that you're developing. Deployment costs are high as well. So everything is SaaS and deployment is per application, and in some cases can even be time limited. Options like 3 apps for 3 years. Also, application maintenance post-deployment can also be slow and costly due to the lack of immediate access. Integration is another issue. So most model-based low-code platforms come with a number, and in some cases a large number of modules for the most popular integration requirements. However, if one is not provided, especially for your on-prem application, then a custom-built connector is required. This again will need to be created and maintained outside the low-code platform development environment. So this is just some of the main reasons why these projects fail. What I want to look at now is how Visual LANSA, our development tool, can help you address each of these areas. So the first one is the unfamiliar environment and concept. Well, LANSA provides a traditional development environment called Visual LANSA, and we'll see that later in the hands-on demo. And this offers all the benefits and power of a low-code tool, but allows developers full control of the source, including editing and debugging. On the limited flexibility in development, well, Visual LANSA has a single development language. And this allows developers to develop any type of application, whether that is on-prem or in the cloud. Regards to complex requirements, well, Visual LANSA allows developers to focus on solving business issues rather than technology ones, and we'll see more of that when we look at the architecture in a second. On the hidden cost side, well, with Visual LANSA, you are not restricted to the number of applications you create or the number of users that access your applications. Deployment is per server, not per application. And there are private cloud and web server deployment options available. Custom integration, well, because a LANSA developer can code any type of application within Visual LANSA, if a connector doesn't already exist, they can create it themselves inside the development tool. In fact, they will not have to leave the development environment to do any of the development. So now that I've talked about Visual LANSA, let's have a look and see what it actually is. And I'll put this architecture diagram in front. So really, LANSA, the company, was started by a team of developers who were looking at a way of not only developing applications faster, but also reducing the ongoing maintenance cost. Now, this is with a view to speeding up that development. So with these objectives in mind, the team developed a multi-tiered architecture with a centralized repository containing a business rules engine. Now, this is supported by what was then referred to, and this is over 35 years ago, it was referred to as a high-level business language. But today, it'd be referred to as a low-code language. Visual LANSA is also database agnostic. This architecture that you see allows developers to develop applications over multiple data sources aggregating that data into a single application. A table is a table is a table to a Visual LANSA developer, regardless of where it comes from. Now, combining the architecture in a single low-code language, it enables a Visual LANSA developer to develop applications quicker, whether it's Windows, web, mobile, or an integration solution. The architecture also has an additional benefit because everything is centrally located located in the repository. The ongoing maintenance cost of your application can be reduced by up to 80%. So with Visual LANSA, developers can focus on solving business issues rather than technology ones. The combination of wizards, templates, and a high-level language allow a developer to meet the business requirements quicker. This helps to reduce technical debt, so you don't have to sacrifice long-term goals for short-term fixes. It also increases a developer's efficiency as they only need one tool to develop any type of application. All Visual LANSA developers are full stack developers. So as a Visual LANSA developer, I can create any type of application. So at this point, I'm going to go on to a demonstration. So I'm going to start by using one of our templates to create a web page, and I'll show you that web page running. And then once we've done that, we'll go into the repository. So this is the Visual LANSA IDE Integrated Development Environment, and we'll see exactly how the different components fit together. And I'll even do some editing with our WYSIWYG and our code edit as part of that process. A little bit about the setup that I'm currently using. So there are many different ways we can configure Visual LANSA, which is our development environment, with a central repository. In my case, I have LANSA installed on my IBM I. That is my master repository. And that master repository will then serve these slave systems. So I have Visual LANSA installed on my desktop, and I can check objects out of the IBM I, do some work, and then check them back in again. So this is the process that we're going to look at now. I'm going to pull up the IDE. So this is our integrated development environment. So as a LANSA developer, this is where I will be spending all of my time. Yep. So all my debugging, all my coding is done from within inside this environment. Just a quick aside, what you're seeing in front of you is Visual LANSA version 15. It was actually written using Visual LANSA version 14. So what you're seeing in front of you is a prime example of the types of applications, Windows applications in this case, you can develop using our tool set. I have IIS installed locally, and I also have an SQL, a Microsoft SQL database, which I use to access. I'm connected to an IBM I, so I can check things in and check things out of that IBM I, and I'll show you that process in a second. So I'm going to focus initially on building a mobile web application. So I'm going to select this one here, and we can see the different templates which are available. If I just scroll down, we can see the different formats for the mobile. We've got dashboards, we've got information websites. So these are non-transactional, just basic information, corporate brochures. And we've even got complete applications, things like contacts. We even have an online e-commerce shop. So these are templates which we can use to create the functionality quickly. And then from there, we can then go in and customizing it using our IDE, our development environment. So if one of these applications matches your requirements, you can just generate it, and then you can go in and customize it. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to be using one of my templates here. And in fact, I'm going to use the first template. So I'm going to select that. I then have a series of questions. The first one is, what do I want to prefix my objects with? So anything that I create will be prefixed with A01. I'm going to call this one my demonstration. I'm going to create a project folder. So that's what we mean by add to favorites. And I'm going to be using routing, which is a way of navigating around web pages. I'll create 3 web pages by default. I can add more if I need to. I'm just going to leave it as the default. So what the first page is going to be is called contacts, and that is going to maintain a database table. These are the different options that we have available. The table is going to be called X contacts. I can prompt on that, and we can see a list of tables that I've got defined in the repository. I'll talk more about that in a second. I'm going to make sure that is selected. What do we want to do? We don't want to do a create, read, update, and delete. So we want to do a CRUD. I don't need attached notes and attachments for that, so I'm going to turn that one off. The search list is going to contain 3 items: the full name, the full address, and the email address, derived from the columns in that table. Second view, or the second web page, is just a straightforward contact us. That's one of the options that we have. And the third will be a chart. So this is using one of our Google chart widgets that we have inside our repository, just to show you a sample. Now with LANSA, we don't need to know anything about CSS. We have a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, design tool for creating a theme. These themes will be used to generate the style sheets necessary to run your application. So you don't need to know anything about CSS. You use our WYSIWYG to create the theme. So I'm going to leave it as the default, and I'm going to generate that application. So that will go off and it will create everything it needs to run it. So while it's doing that, let's have a look and see what it's actually doing and what's happening under the covers. But when we look at web development, we look at the client and we look at the server. So everything that I do inside the environment, I'll be generating either JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for the client, or C and C++ for the server side code. So when a browser makes a request to the server, then that server will then send down the web page, the HTML, and all the necessary JavaScript and images and CSS required to run the page. On the server side, we have these containers called server modules. Think of it as a library. This library is a way of organizing our APIs. We call our APIs server routines. Now, these server routines can also be published to allow external programs to call them via REST APIs. So just to summarize, the server module is just a container. Each server routine is a separate API. So that when the client makes a call, an AJAX call is passed using a JSON message. Now, I don't really need to know that as a LANSA developer. I'm just calling my API. I don't need to understand JSON. I don't need to understand JavaScript or AJAX calls. It's handled for me. That call will then trigger off the API, so it'll do some work. So it'll either access a local table sitting on my local server or a remote table. So it doesn't have to be on the same server. I could call a REST API, or I could access another data source, like an Excel spreadsheet, for example. Once that server routine has done its functions, then it'll pass back the data to the client. Okay, so it's important. It only passes back the data. It doesn't rebuild the web page. It just passes back the data. It's what we call a single page web application. Everything is already on the client, ready to run. All we do then is just pass the data backwards and forwards. So my application would have been compiled by now. So before I actually run it, what I want to do is I'm going to check this in to my IBMI. Let me just make sure I've got my connection to my system. Let me connect. Okay, there we go. Right, so I've now connected to my IBMI, which is sitting in Houston. I can just do a right click on this, go demonstration object, check in. I'll say okay to that. And I'm just going to check in the object which is open. So what I'm doing Now I have an option of being able to run it locally or run it on the actual IBMI itself. So while that's doing that, let's have a look and see what it looks like locally first. So this is the basic web application has been generated. So I've got the About option. We've got the Settings option, but as soon as I go into the settings or anything to do with the web page, it asks me to validate the user. I can change the settings. I can even change the theme just by doing the click. Now, what I really want to show you is this part, is the contacts. So when I press the contacts, it fires off that JSON request up to the server, retrieves the data, and then sends the data back down. So every time I do that request, so here's the search criteria. I do all. It'll then go up to the server, make that request, do the processing, and then send down the resulting data. If I select one of the entries, I get this little pop-up. Now, this is a mobile-first application. So with LANSA, we can develop different types of web apps, whether that is a mobile web app or a back office system style web app. And we can create them with a responsive design, which means that if I resize this web page, you'll notice that the way that it's designed and the way that it navigates also changes. So now, rather than having a separate pop-up, I have this dialog which fills the entire page. If I try to do an update, so I've deleted the last name and then fire off a insert into my database, you'll notice I get an error message. And that error message isn't stored inside the program. It's stored inside the central repository. If I resize, it then goes back to being a specific dialog. Now, the overall design and feel of the web page, so inside our repository, we have material design controls. So specifically Google material design, they spent billions researching how screens should look running on mobile and web applications and devices. So what the icons should look like, what color combinations work, what input boxes should look like. So we built into our IDE those types of controls so that the developer doesn't need to worry about the styling. It's already there. You can create your own style. Yep, so we have some basic controls you can apply your own styling to, but why would you when you've got access to these sorts of controls? Okay, so that's now done. Now let's have a look and see the same application running on the IBMI. So I've got an option here to do an execute. There's my IBMI. I'm going to fire that one off, and it's going to be the exact same application. Okay, it's gone off, got the contacts, same application, but now I'm running directly from my IBMI. So you can see it doesn't really matter what environment I'm in. As long as I've got my LANSA installed, I can just deploy it and it will run. Okay, we'll see some changes in a minute for that. So that was the application, but what was actually built as part of that process? So here's my demonstration folder. So this is the one that was created. So think of that as my project folder. And each of these are the objects which have been generated. So the main, the views, and the dialogues are essentially the client. That's the HTML and the JavaScript and the CSS. The server module sits on the server to serve the clients. That generates C and C++. But again, as a LANSA developer, I don't really care. I work always at the visual LANSA level. I don't ever have to go down into the code which we generate. We also use the table called contacts. Now, if I go into the repository here, we can see all the different table definitions that we have. Now you'll notice that some are gray. That means that they're on the IBMI and not local. Okay, so if I see a gray item, the definition resides, but it's actually on the IBMI, and I've not actually got it on my local system. Different colored icons mean that they're external tables. So I can easily, so if I go into my tools option here, I can go in and I can import different table definitions. So whether that is locally or from an SQL system or MySQL, yeah, it doesn't matter, or directly from the IBMI. So if I've already got a system created and I want to use those tables or files, then I can import those definitions, populate my repository, and then start writing applications over the top of those tables. Okay, so there's no need to have to start from scratch. You can create your own if you need to, but if you've already got them, we can make them known. So I'm going to go back to my favorites. Go into contacts. I'm going to open it up just so you can see what the definition actually looks like. So here you can see it's a keyed physical. It has these columns within the table, these fields. It also has these virtual fields. Think of these as creature comforts for a developer. So if I pull up full contact name, it actually isn't what we call a real field. It's a virtual field in that it's derived from the fields that exist within inside this table. In this case, if we look here, we can see a code snippet that is just concatenating the first name and the last name. We can do calculations, we can look up in other tables and pull information in from other tables, or we can create the views. So there's a number of different things that we can do. And then as a developer, all I need to do is use that full name, and I don't have to worry about coding that. The reason I came in here, though, was to look at this. So these are our rules and triggers. So these are things, so one of the key concepts of our repository is define once and use many. If you're going to use it more than once, stick it in the repository. That can be anything from a stored procedure to a reusable piece of code to validation rules. So for example, the one that we triggered when we were trying to insert a record into that table was this one, which is saying that the last name cannot be blank. We can decide on the conditions on what that validation rule or when that validation rule is actually applied and what to do if it's not. And we can have fairly complex validation rules and we can have nested rules. In fact, there's a wide number of different validation rules that we can stick into the repository. And again, so as a developer, this is another thing that I don't have to think about. It can speed up the process because I can focus on the business requirements to solve the business problem. I don't have to worry about making sure that the data going into the database is correct because those rules are already in that database. Yep. So it makes sure that anything that's being written is always correct. Likewise, anything being deleted. Yeah. So anything being deleted will also be checked to make sure that if you've got a relationship set up with a parent-child, yeah, relationship set up, that you don't get any orphaned children. So that's the validation, different types of validation rules. But let's go and have a look at this, the code itself. So I'm going to make some changes. So we've already seen, so if I go back to the main web page here, so this is the main web page. Each of these are the views. Now I mentioned about the maintenance side of things. So if I wanted to see where an object is being used and everything in LANSA is an object, I can cross-reference it. So I can see what it's being used or what's using it and what is being used by it. Yeah, so this is all the different things, so uses. So you can see that I've got server modules, I've got dialogues and reusable items, all using. So if I was to make a change to the contacts table, I've got an instant impact list. Now I know that, you know, if I make a change, add a field to the contacts table or change the size of a field, I actually don't have to do much with these. The only one I'm really concerned about is the dialogues, because if they're being displayed and I change the field size from 50 to 500, then I may need to look at that display to see if it overlaps anything. But the others, I know because it's LANSA, I can just make that change and I'm done. It'll automatically be picked up from within inside that repository. Okay, so let's move on. So I'm going to make a change. So let's have a look at one of our components. So which one am I going to use? Let's go into contacts. So I'm going to open that up. So this is our WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. You know, there's the source behind it, but we don't need to worry about it. This is a client, so we've got a drag and drop sorts of functionality. And what I'll do is I'll add a mobile phone number to the list, to this particular list. So I'm going to go to my repository tab here, grab the mobile phone number, and drop that on there. Now, you notice I just dropped it anywhere. So if I was to compile this and run, the mobile phone number would actually appear right there. Because this is a mobile responsive app, this actually controls each of the elements that appear on the page. So for example, if I look at full name and then go to the top left and look at layout, we can see that it's being laid out. It's what we call a layout manager. So it's being put in row 1, column 1. It's a list item. Alignment to the center left, size to fit to width, and flow, center vertical, 86 and 15 for the margins. So I'm just going to repeat that for the mobile phone number. And then what that'll do is allow this form to control where that mobile phone number has appeared. So when I resize it, it will appear in the right place. There you go. So then go onto 86. No, that's not quite right. Let's put that back down. Just select one of those and go 86. Go to this one and go 15. Okay, that's that. And then from there, I can just grab the chevron. So that's a little bit too big. So what I want to do is actually resize that. So I could grab the chevrons, but once again, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it in a different way. So mobile phone number highlighted, all objects. So everything in LANSA is an object, has got properties, events, and methods associated with it. So when I look for the properties, I can go down and I'm going to look for height. I'm going to change that to 20. Okay. And while I'm here, so I've got it in the right position, but while I'm here, I'm going to add an icon. File icon for that one. Let's make it look a little bit more modern. And I might as well do the same for the email address. Or email, like that, and select that one. Okay, that's it for that. One more change I want to make. There's a lot of empty space when I show the list. So I'm going to have 3 entries per line. So I'm just going to go into that and go rows per, let's have a look. So display position, items per row, I'm going to have as 3. And I'm going to resize that. There we go, that's it. That's all I'm going to do for that. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go home and I'm going to actually check in that change because I want to run this directly on the IBMI. So I'm going to check that one in. So I've made that change. Now I need to make one final change, and that is to change the server-side logic. So again, I can go into the cross-reference here, go into use by, right-click, and open. Now here I don't have an interface. This is our code. So this is your first example of looking at the Visual LANSA code. So I need to make a change. This is the server routine that we're calling. So this is the API. Now these could be related or not related. It doesn't really matter. The server module is just a way of grouping these together. This is a server routine called find. Session required means that you need to have logged on. It's got one input, which is the search parameter, and one output, which is the list, which is the one I need to do some changes to. So I can do a right click, list, go to definition. Everything is promptable. So if I do an F4, I get the prompt and I can fill out the command from here. There's also F1 behind everything. So I can then see what that particular command does and even have examples of what and how I use that particular command. Okay, so this is where I need to make the change. So again, multiple ways of doing this. I can just start typing, and as soon as I go through, I can do X contact, mobile, done. That's the only change I need to do. Okay, I'm going to compile that. I'm going to check it in, just so it's available in the IBMI. Okay, so just having a look at some of the other pieces of this code. So there's the inputs and the outputs. This is just manipulating the search criteria, just putting it into uppercase and getting rid of blanks. This is actually doing the fetch. So it's a multiple fetch. We call it select, selecting all the fields from the list, from the table, called X contacts, and we're going to handle any validation errors or IO errors. The if condition is just checking the search criteria. So if it exists initially, so if it's blank, add it to the list, or the contact email address, contact full name address, and contact full name are checked to see if it contains that value, and then added to the list. But that's it. That's all that needs to be done. Now we're finished. I go in, back to my main web page. So now I'm going to execute it again, but I'm going to execute it directly on the IBMI this time. Okay, there we go. So when I go into X contacts, go sign in. If I've done it right, we should now see the updated version of the actual list. So now this is running again against DB2400 directly from my IBMI using my IBMI web server. And there's the changes that have been added to that. Okay. So that is as much as the demonstration. Really just to give you an overview of how LANSA works, the LANSA environment, and how quickly you can create these types of applications. In fact, LANSA has a track record of innovation and of adopting the latest technologies. As I mentioned, I've been with the company now 26 years, so I've gone through quite a few changes in the underlying technology. I've used the same language for that length of time. In fact, the language has been around for 35 years, but what's changed is the power of that language, what is actually generated underneath. So as a developer myself, a LANSA developer, I actually focus on solving business issues. I don't actually solve technology ones. Yeah, LANSA will handle that. You've got this technology insurance. We have customers that have applications that were written 30 years ago, still running those applications, running on a modern infrastructure. And there's not many development tools out there that have that sort of track record. So whether you want to develop your application to run on your in-house infrastructure or to run in the cloud, then LANSA can help with both those versions. So at this point, that concludes my part. So I will hand back to Mike to take you through our partner programs and how we can help you.
So thank you, Eugene. And again, this was intended to show you how you could help your developers build products. And we have different partner programs. There's a referral program. The VAR is a value-added reseller. So if you wanted to sell the product, the master distributor is primarily used in Asia Pacific. But kind of our focus today has been all around ISVs or building applications that you would embed our technology and then leverage that to develop applications for your customers. And both the VAR and the ISV have a silver, gold, and platinum level. The primary difference between those things is the number of developers in the case of an ISV that you would have on staff. And there's also a difference in terms of the level of expert on demand support that you would get on that. level, depending on the level. So how do we support? Basically, there's training, education, training, marketing, and then product support. So oftentimes ISVs prefer to kind of go on their own. We do have, in some cases, where we have done webinars or promotions with ISVs. It's more common in the VAR environment, but it is not restricted to a value-added reseller. What we do with ISVs that's a little bit different, as we do offer expert on demand. So there's a certain amount of expert on demand hours that are included. So what that would be is helping you to build an application, or if you had a question in terms of architecture, you leverage the expertise of our consulting team on a sort of request basis. So it's not a situation where you need to set up a statement of work. You just call, hey, here's kind of the problem I'm having, and we'll get the right expert assigned to you to help you. So the other thing that you get with the partner program is Learn LANSA. It's full access to Learn LANSA. This is an online training environment. So you can use the expert on demand to backstop this, but it enables you to go anywhere from the sort of the basic concepts through web design, as you saw Eugene doing in his demonstration, all the way to APIs. So Visual LANSA comes with the REST API capability built in. We do have other technologies. We spent today only going over the Visual LANSA capabilities or building applications. We also have transformation, information transformation and transportation options. Basically, you bring us the problem and we will tell you how we will help you solve it. So that's all part of what we do in the partner program. And another application specific really to the IBMI space is the ability to help you with modernization. And that's another area that we didn't really cover today, but we'll be happy to discuss moving forward. So at this point, if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the chat, and we will take questions. So we had, Eugene, actually had one come through while you were speaking. So I think I can probably tackle this one. Is LANSA AS400 only? The answer to that is no. We do have, we got our start in the IBMI space, basically building applications that started with green screen, the ability to build applications more quickly in that environment, quickly move to kind of client server and now web, which is what you saw today. All three of those environments are available to you. So depending on the type of application or customer you're building for, you can use those, but it is not tied only to the IBMI. So we do have, I would say the vast majority of our ISVs do use the IBMI or as part of their environment. So we have a lot of ERP ISVs, but we also are seeing an increasing number of ISVs that do Windows only. So we're able to do both. We are not restricted to having to have an IBMI. It's really an advantage that we offer, is if you're developing applications for customers using the iSeries, we have significant capabilities and advantages in that particular world. So I have another question. So how is it licensed? Basically, for an ISV, we are very flexible. So the typical environment for an ISV is different than would be a VAR. So if you were an end user, you would basically be licensed, as Eugene mentioned, by server. But in an ISV world, that doesn't always work. So with ISVs, often you're also trying to host your application in the cloud, and we have business models that operate in that method as well. So whether it's cloud deployment, user deployment, we're able to map to your business model. So again, very, very flexible. It's part of being an ISV partner with LANSA. And so happy to have discussions with you in more detail on that front. Okay, Eugene, this one is going to be for you. What are the training requirements?
Okay, so essentially you saw the last slide that Mike went through with regards to Learn LANSA. So you would start off with the fundamentals, which is 4 to 5 days, which teaches you about the repository, the programming, how everything fits together. And then depending on what type of application you want to build, because as Mike has mentioned, we can build quite a number of different types of applications. So whether you want to publish or consume REST APIs, we have a course on that. If you want to create web applications, we have a course on that as well. And they range from between 2 to 5 days in length. So if you wanted to do mobile web, 4 to 5 for the fundamentals and another 4 for the mobile development. Again, it's kind of like a pick and mix depending on what your specific requirements are for your project.
Okay, so that was the last question. Eugene, again, want to thank everyone for your time. If you do ask a question in the chat that we missed, that I didn't see, we will get back to you with an answer. But thank you again to everyone for your time. Have a wonderful day or evening, depending on where in the world you are. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.